Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the conservation podcast. The show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and today I am joined by Ian Allan, the Supervisor of Natural Areas and Arboriculture at the Blue Mountains Botanic Garden. He's an incredibly interesting person with an incredibly interesting career and some amazing stories to tell, so I can't wait for you all to learn more. Just to give you a taste of some of those incredible stories, just to keep you on the line, we talk about all sorts of stuff. First, we talk about the garden he works in itself and why it's such a special and unique place. Then, we discuss the Ballad of the Wollemi Pine, a species that was long thought to be extinct, but has since returned to us. And this one, side note, this one in particular is an emotional roller coaster, so get your tissues ready, be prepared, it's a good one. We then highlight an underappreciated species that he loves, and that takes the form of the Dwarf Mountain Pine, before we discuss some of the wonderful birds of the Blue Mountains Botanic Garden, including the lyrebird and the gang cockatoo. As you can probably tell, we've got a lot to get through, so I will leave it here, and without further ado, let's get started. And welcome back to the show. I am now joined by Ian Allan, the Supervisor of Natural Areas and Arboriculture at the Royal Botanic Garden Sydney's Blue Mountain Botanic Garden, Mount Tomah. And just to kick us off today, Ian, I want to say a huge thank you for joining me today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Jack. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having a good old chat about everything.
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm very excited to have you here because I think it's going to be really exciting and interesting for me. For listeners who don't know, I also work in a botanic garden. I work at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, so it's really interesting for me to learn more about plants. I don't think it's something we haven't highlighted enough on the show, so I think it's just going to be a really great conversation that we're kind of shifting focus slightly from our usual animal-based conservation to the more plant side, which is really exciting and really interesting as well. So thank you for joining. Thank you. Yes, thank you. What I want to kick off with, I think I gave you a brief introduction at the start there, but I always like to say, you know yourself and your work far better than I do. So could you please introduce yourself to the listeners? What should they know about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I do work. Our garden is owned by the New South Wales state government, so we have a good tendency to give big, long job titles. But yeah, basically, yeah, I'm Ian. My job day to day is supervisor of arboriculture and natural areas, and also open space at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens. And we're a satellite garden of the Royal Botanic Garden of Sydney, which is the oldest botanic garden in Australia. Um, and along with our other sister garden, the other satellite garden, which is the Australian Botanic Garden at Mount Annan in Western Sydney, the three of us sort of function as three very unique gardens underneath the one big Royal Botanic Garden Sydney umbrella. And yeah, my day to day job is I oversee all the trees, all the natural areas, 150 hectares of UNESCO World Heritage Wilderness Area quality natural bushland, and all the open space, so the turf and everything that's not a sort of ornamental part of our living collection and garden. Um, and yeah, I guess my sort of I run along with another supervisor. We're responsible for all the operations on the ground with teams of arborists, natural areas specialists in conservation land management, yeah, turf managers and horticulturists, apprentices, and everything like that. So pretty exciting. I'd say to people, I've got my dream job. But yeah, we really are. It's a cool climate garden with one of the best tree collections in Australia. And like I said, I get paid to be out in the bush in this World Heritage wilderness area that's just 2 hours west of Sydney. So it's magic.
Yeah, I was I was going to say being in charge of trees at a botanic garden seems like a very very important job. They're the things that I think people who come to wander around a garden, they're obviously the big kind of stuff that they'll notice. So yes, that yeah must be a lot of pressure. A very important big, sometimes scary, interesting job.
Yeah, yeah, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, and that's sort of my, I guess I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but I guess my background really, I came as a gardener into all of this. Like I always like to think I'm a horticulturist first and foremost, and then sort of moved into arboriculture, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. Started as an apprentice working for rich people. So even spent a little bit of time doing the Aussie backpacker thing in northern London, working in rich people's gardens there. And then I sort of came into botanic gardens. It was always this sort of idea and dream of mine to do it. And um, I guess, yeah, I had this sort of, my uncle was a horticulturist as well, and he worked at the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney, many years ago, and actually lived on site there. And he was a landscape architect, and I always sort of knew these stories about him in my family. But as a there's a lot of people I work with some amazing people now who are the true plant collectors, or the kids that grew up like obsessing about plants, and to be honest, that wasn't really me. I Yeah, I sort of, I didn't fall into it, but coming out of high school, high school doesn't really teach you what's out there in terms of jobs. And I knew I wanted to work outside. I knew I wanted to work in gardening and plants or landscaping. But even though I'd heard all these stories about my uncle, so like he discovered several plant species. He's got a eucalypt named after him, Eucalyptus alternai, um, that he discovered on his bushwalking. He's got his own personal herbarium. I still didn't even know what that was when I was 18. I didn't no idea what botanic gardens horticulture was all about. No idea what even that type of conservation horticulture was about. It was just landscaping and gardening with fancy plants. And yeah, it sort of went this big long circle. And sort of after 6 or 7 years of doing all of that, and came back home from living overseas, and was like, I want to work in the botanic gardens. It's what I want to do. And I actually didn't get a job. I applied for a job at the Sydney Gardens, and they had a little plant ID test. I didn't even know what half the plants were. Um, and had never driven a tractor in my life or used some of the bigger machinery and done the bigger gardening stuff. And they gave me some feedback and said, you really need to get that experience. You need to sort of maybe go and get a few more qualifications. And yeah, I went back to school, back to TAFE, which is our technical sort of college here, and just set about trying to achieve that dream. So when I got my job at the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens, it really was a dream come true. It was kind of crazy.
Mm. Yeah, that's amazing. It's actually very similar to my experience in that, like, I started at the Botanic Garden at the start of the pandemic. I just finished my degree, and I was kind of looking for something new. And my degree was obviously in conservation, so I was aware of plants and ecosystems, and I kind of had this appreciation for them, let's say, but I didn't necessarily know a lot about them. And I saw this job come up, and I thought, actually, that is so interesting because it was all about converting courses that were previously taught in person into online learning. And so I thought that's really something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the communication of conservation, even though I don't know a lot about plants. Maybe I could. And then since then, I've really kind of I kind of have grown to love plants over time. So it's been an interesting one, but yeah, the similarities I suppose are kind of there of like this appreciation without maybe not knowing a lot about them, and then as I obviously did my learning once I got the job, but like you just kind of, the more you learn, the more you fall in love, and it's amazing. And actually, yeah, I was going to ask a very similar question to that actually about kind of like how did you fall in love with plants, but you seem to you've kind of answered that already. Like it's really interesting to hear about like how maybe when you were younger you weren't particularly interested, but it's grown and kind of now you've ended up where you've ended up. It's actually, yeah, such an interesting kind of life, career, everything trajectory. Really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's strange. I still remember as a kid, like planting my first ever tree. It was that classic Arbor Day, like I think in the bicentennial of Australia in 1988 or something. They gave away all these trees to kids, and I still remember what it was. It was an Acacia baileyana, a Cootamundra wattle, and it common as mark, but with this silvery grey foliage, juvenile foliage that's sort of feathery. And I was interested in plants. Like I used to be I'd wonder, why does that plant, and this other plant in my family's garden, it was like, why does it have a compound leaf? I didn't even know what a compound leaf was. And I'd sit there pulling it apart whilst my brother would be, he's in the army. He was always obsessed with being in the army, and he'd be like, "What are you doing? Playing with plants?" and like push me into the bushes, kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I didn't really know about it as a career. Didn't really know that that was this thing that you could do and study. And it's sort of become a thing. I love sharing that passion that I have now with younger people, with showing them, like, there's all these amazing jobs outside in conservation, in horticulture, that make a difference. That you get to interact with the real world, the living world.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like it's one of those things that a lot of the time people say, like, "Oh, you work in a botanic garden. Is it just spending all day like walking around looking at plants and like but it's a lot more complicated than that. And like there's a lot I feel like that goes on behind the scenes that people don't get to see. That's really really interesting, really really exciting, but you don't they don't appreciate it that goes on because they don't necessarily see all the complicated stuff. So that's yeah, it's really really interesting. Yeah, to hear your kind of perspective on that one. I guess I hadn't written this down as a question, but just to kind of like help me actually and help everyone else understand, like, what is your day to day, like when you go in the mornings and things, what is it that you're doing in the day to day?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I mean, I sort of manage these teams of horticulturists. Um, it's got to a point. I get, the further up you go with your career, sometimes you get a bit further away from the plants. So I've just spent a year kind of acting in the curator manager job, which is the next tier up from my job, where I sort of oversaw the whole garden. But it was, I guess, one of the wonderful things about my job is that it daily is so diverse. I mean, I could spend a day where I might come in and I'll have time scheduled in with the horticulturist who looks after the natural areas, and we'll be out there in the field, walking the tracks, maintaining the tracks, monitoring things. We're in a big building phase in our garden, so we're sort of building the platform for the future. We're really doing a lot of planning, a lot of looking at what it is that we have. Yeah, I guess people, like you said, a lot of people don't know what botanic gardens horticulture is. Like, even my brother came to the garden for the first time last year, and I explained to him that every single one of our plants in the living collection has a tag on it. It's GPS located. It's got records behind it. Hopefully, it's from our preference is that it's sourced in the wild and has a conservation and science purpose. And he was blown away. He's like, I honestly never knew that that's what you did. I just thought you mowed some lawns and cut down some trees. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you were to really, really simplify, but that seems, yeah, a harsh simplification. But yeah, yeah, at the end of the day, maybe like, yeah, uh, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I'm running a summer school for kids in the garden here in Edinburgh, and I'm now nervous because I always forget that there is such a important conservation purpose there. That like in like a normal summer school, if we were outdoors, you can like have them like turning over logs and like looking at things and like, but here like you can do that to a certain extent, but you have to like protect the plants because they're there with a conservation purpose. You have to be very careful with them. Like they are there for a reason beyond enjoyment of them in an aesthetic fashion or enjoyment of kind of them for an educational tool. They're there for a conservation purpose. So yeah, I kind of
yeah.
I'm gonna have to remember that a lot during the summer. I think it's really really interesting, really really interesting. I wondered, moving slightly on, I think I've just kind of realized that we're talking away about botanic gardens and your job and the day to day and stuff, but we haven't actually introduced the garden itself. So I don't know if you wanted to kind of maybe give the listeners more context for our discussion. Could you tell them a little bit more about the Blue Mountains Botanic Garden, Mount Toma? I know you've kind of told us it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's very, very important, very, very unique and special place. But yeah, do you want to tell them maybe a little bit more about it and what could they expect if they visited? Maybe that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So, like I touched on before, I guess, so the Blue Mountain Botanic Gardens, Mount Toma, is a satellite garden of the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney. So we're about 2 hours west of Sydney, up in the Blue Mountains, and that we sit at about 1,000 meters. In Australia, that's pretty high. We don't have giant mountains like in Europe and a lot of the rest of the world, but so yeah, we sit up in this really interesting climatic area where Sydney's a sort of temperate zone, but because we're up at 1,000 meters, we're on this mountain range that is dotted with these basalt outcrops that are related to a sort of a volcanic period in Australia's deep past. And so we sort of sit on the verge of the Great Dividing Range that runs the entire east coast of Australia, and we're right where the moist, humid, sort of temperate coastal air meets this dry western cold air off the plains, and we get about a meter to a meter and a half of rainfall a year in a normal year. If it's a drought year, we can be right down to 600 mils a year or less. We've just had two La Nina-driven weather events that have pushed that way up into meters of rain a year. But really, I guess what it is it creates this incredible, unique soil and climatic condition for growing all sorts of stuff, which in Australia is very rare. You know, Australia is this super old continent. Our soils are generally incredibly ancient and incredibly skeletal and low in nutrients, often quite shallow. And yet, in this basalt outcrop, it was these things were sought out by early colonialists and settlers for horticultural uses. And the garden was actually a flower farm. So we're right at the top of the mountain. We've got 360 almost degrees of aspect, and a family that had run it as a flower farm right through the 1900s ended up donating it to the New South Wales government for $1 on the condition that it become a botanic garden, and part of the Royal Botanic Garden Sydney. And back in about 1987, the garden was built as this huge bicentennial funded project through Australia's bicentennial. And it was a really unique thing in Australia. Like, a lot of gardens were funded around that time, but our garden was built with this incredibly strong landscape design. So the government architects did this incredible job. They designed this strong thematic collection. They used these incredible basalt crystals that are mined off the site, and built incredible walls. Where they built the what we believe is the biggest rock garden in the Southern Hemisphere. And they set out with this strong curatorial sort of theme to be a cool climate garden with a focus on Southern Hemisphere plants, some cool climate Northern Hemisphere plants, but and a real focus on telling the story of plant evolution and their links to Gondwana and things like Proteaceae. So from the very beginning, the garden's 35 years old this year. It's just had this sort of really uniquely powerful, not just plan and design, but this unique space. So it sits in the middle of the UNESCO World Heritage Wilderness Area in the Blue Mountains, and we have this wonderful view out into that, and we actually are lucky enough to also own and control about, like I said, 230 hectares. Not sure if that's 400 and something acres of that wilderness that backs onto national park and pristine wilderness. So yeah, really special, like a really special place. And actually, I'm sorry just to ramble a little bit, but one thing that's important to me, and I should have done this at the start, is it's important to us to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on where the garden is and where I'm speaking from today, and they're the Darug people. And I'd like to just acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, and hopefully people like me, we can be stewards of the land that we're looking after, that was always theirs and one of the oldest continuing civilizations on Earth and cultures on Earth. And that's a really important thing to us, that we're trying to build our connections back to those communities and trying to be led and guided by their ancient knowledge that they have about managing that land and conserving it. So yeah, all of those things come together for it just to be a magical place, special place to work, and something I feel really privileged to be able to do.
Yeah, and it's so important, and it's a discussion I think that's been raised a lot the last few years, is kind of the validity of living collections and how they're used and how they've been collected, and how can we make sure that they're used in the best way going forward, and how can we make sure that the past is embraced and learned from, and mistakes are not made again. And there's all kind of discussions about decolonization and all that sort of stuff going on, and I think that's so interesting that it's a discussion that's happening a lot here in Scotland and in the UK, and I think it's really exciting and interesting and important for me to hear, and for us all to know that on the other side of the world, those discussions are still happening, and it's really, really important and nice to kind of hear about that as well, because it's such important vital work. And I think without it, that there's just no way a collection, I think, in 2022 can function without thinking about it in some way. I think it's really, really important. Something else that's striking me is like when you're talking about it's so new, and like the fact that it's a relatively new garden. Well, in terms of the grand scheme of things, I think a lot of people picture, when they think of botanic gardens, things like the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. I'm going to bring that a lot today. It's my touching point for gardens, but like it's over 300 years old. So it's like interesting to hear about this new garden that you work in, that's kind of newer garden that you work in, that's kind of really set theme and kind of set kind of the plants that are all kind of I was going to say local is in southern hemisphere, and all kind of really strongly themed around this idea. And I think that's really, really exciting and really, really interesting, that it's this new but strong idea focused place. I think that's really, really exciting and interesting. I wondered though, how does it kind of relate to Sydney? So is it kind of a distinct thing, and it's kind of really, really separate, and they're both really strongly themed in different directions? Is it kind of, yours is more a wild type garden that's kind of focused on plants from the area, and then Sydney's more from around plants from around the world? Like how does it work, and how does that relationship kind of function there as well?
Yeah, I guess for us, we think of it a bit like Sydney's the oldest botanic garden in Australia, right on the shores of Sydney Harbour there, and it's very much got more of that heritage combination. So whilst it's got an incredible living collection, one of the best palm collections in the world outside of Kew and places like that, but it's got that element of it gets 5 million people visiting it a year. It's got a strong heritage layout, a very, very traditional layout to it. And whereas our garden, it complements that in we can grow things that they just can't grow because we're 2 hours away from that. The fact that we can grow these incredible, we can grow sequoias, we can grow all sorts of wonderful, huge trees. We've got some very old plantings from the people that donated the land to the garden. But I guess we're able to also play this role where we're starting to really shape the way we think about our garden, as the term bio-refuge is sort of thrown around a little bit, or, bio-refugia, where because we're we're essentially an island surrounded by this buffer of natural bushland up in the mountains. So whilst that comes with a unique bunch of risks and environmental risks and environmental threats, it also allows us to essentially grow plants in a way that they're protected from some of the other risks like pathogens. A lot of our northern hemisphere plants, we have this potential to be a plant sentinel to look for pathogens, to protect wild collected plants from the northern hemisphere, like things like our ash collection, things where in North America, due to emerald ash borer, all their ash trees are under threat, just like they lost chestnuts. Their pine trees are under threat from pine beetle. And we can actually collect these plants in a way that really does conserve them just by having them. So even if we don't do really strong conservation work or science work on them, we're holding up that genetic material and preserving it in a way that really does have a buffer. I like to think we're almost an island on an island, because you throw in the fact that we're in Australia. We're so far away from everything, and our quarantine has always been a really strong thing for us that helps protect us. So yeah, I think that's one of the most unique things about that, and we're working hard with a lot of the botanic gardens in the Australian and New Zealand network to think of all the gardens with similar bioregions and how we can share our plant material and our collections to protect them, and make sure that those really rare and important things that we're working on and are saving aren't just sitting in a stamp collection in a garden where we don't share it around.
That's fantastic, actually. It's really, 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 really cool. Really, really cool. Now, I guess you kind of, you talked about it there as kind of this island away. And what I wanted to know is, like, on this island, in your little slice of paradise in the Blue Mountains, what are some of your favorite species to work with? What are the things the heavy hitters for you that you just love? What are the kind of, the really important, some of your favorite things to work with at the garden?
Yeah, look, I guess there's one that's it's almost bordering on cliche now, but for some of your listeners, I won't assume anyone knows anything, but one of the key I guess the flagship species for us is the Wollemi pine, so Wollemi nobilis, and it our garden's sort of story and origin is really tightly linked to the story of the Wollemi pine. So for your listeners who aren't as familiar with it, I can give the quick rundown of it and why the Wollemi pine is such an amazing species. Is basically the Wollemi pine is a tree species that was thought to be extinct. It only existed in the fossil record from millions of years ago until a New South Wales Parks ranger was canyoning on a personal trip in the Wollemi National Park, which is only a couple of hours northwest of Sydney, and he was in this remote slot canyon. These things are these deep sandstone canyons, and they've got deep rainforest in them. And he was walking through it, and he realized this tree in there was like nothing he'd ever seen before. And he took some leaf material back with him, and he made contact with some people that at the time our botanists that worked for the Royal Botanic Garden Sydney and the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens Tomar, and they tried to ID it, and they all knew that it wasn't normal. They were a bit unsure. They knew that it was potentially an Araucaria or an agathis, and yet they didn't have a cone or any other parts other than these leaves. So there's this whole wonderful story about it. It's captured in a great book called The Wollemi Pine by James Woodford, and it's got the whole story. These botanists set out to try and identify it. They couldn't get it. The short version is that they knew, this is back in 1994, by the way, so health and safety in the workplace was a bit different back then, but the national parks guys got their helicopter, and they flew out and they hovered right above one of these trees, because the botanist said, if we can get a cone from one of these trees, we'll be able to identify this. A guy hung out of the helicopter and snatched a piece of cone off the top of one of these trees. They grow to about almost 40 meters down in these deep canyons, and these helicopter pilots are just incredible, like what they're capable of doing. So they got this cone. The guy almost fell out of the helicopter but didn't. They brought it back to the Botanic Gardens, and the Botanic Gardens managed to identify that it was neither an Araucaria nor an agathis, and it was something in between. And basically, this tree exists in these. They've since discovered four small populations of them. There's less than 100 trees in the wild, and our garden, along with the horticulturists and scientists at the Royal Botanic Garden Sydney, were the first people ever. They propagated it. They kept all of that incredibly secret for a long time because of how high risk pathogen spread into those places was, and people would want to go and find this plant. And yeah, back in the late 90s, they propagated enough of them. They sold them around, like through a big auction, to raise money for their conservation. Since then, they secured the species. They're not going to go extinct yet. I think all over the world, everyone's got a Wollemi pine now. Our scientists just did a citizen science project to find out who was growing them and where. They claimed that the tallest one in cultivation was in Norfolk, I think, in the UK, but they forgot to check some of our records for our plants in our garden. And I'll say we have the tallest ones in cultivation anywhere in the world, sitting at over 12 meters. But then, like all things, the story of that, it's known in Australia, it's known in the world of plant conservation, but I guess it probably lost flavour. Other things happen. People are always tracking other important discoveries in science work. But in 2019, as a lot of people know, the Black Summer bushfires burnt a huge portion of the east coast of Australia, and our garden was facing the fires. The drought, there'd been a long drought period for about 4 or 5 years, and we were sort of always expecting that these bushfires would happen, but no one expected them to be on the scale that they happened. And from the viewing deck up on the mountain at Mount Tomar, we could actually see the bushfire at the time it was called the Gospers Mountain Megafire. Well, they didn't know it was going to be a megafire, but it was a lightning strike that happened in this hugely remote World Heritage Wilderness area in the Wollemi National Park. And it spread and spread and spread, and it was unstoppable because of the conditions. And it went on to burn millions of hectares of the national park. And whilst it threatened the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens Mount Tomar and eventually burnt part of our garden, we also knew that it was going to burn the wild sites of the Wollemi pine. So scientists, this incredible effort had been going on for a couple of years in secret, where scientists from our Department of Environment and our Australian Institute of Botanical Science, which has run our science division out of the Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney, had been working secretly on a translocation site for the Wollemi pine, and they'd been aiming to do a translocation on what we believe is like one of the biggest scales anywhere in the world. So they were going to try and establish two populations of 400 trees in a really complex ecological experiment to essentially establish wild populations. One of the This involved scientists that had been there since the very beginning, such as Dr. Kathy Offord, who's one of our lead scientists, an amazing scientist from the Department of Environment called Baron Mackenzie, and they set this incredible sort of translocation project up. And some of our arborists, and I was lucky enough to be involved in it, were involved in the initial plant out, and this happened about a year before the fires. So we planted 400 or more trees in these two remote populations in these deep canyons in the Wollemi pine in the Wollemi National Park, and we knew that the fires were also going to threaten those. So we couldn't share that with anyone. It wasn't published. We all knew that these things were out there. We knew that these sites would be burnt. And then just before Christmas in 2019, fires actually were a couple of k's away from the wild sites of the Wollemi pine. And I'd been working with Baron over the years on this project, and I got a call out of the blue where the ministers responsible, all the national parks managers, all these conservation scientists, everybody had been summoned to go, we need to do something to try and protect the Wollemi pines. And Baron and I we'd chatted on his translocation experiments about establishing remote sprinkler systems. And I just got this call on a Thursday afternoon that said, we've been asked to try and build a sprinkler system in one of the wild sites and protect it. Do you think you can do it? The two guys we'd normally call, one of them's on holidays in the Himalayas and one's in Tasmania, and we can't reach them. And I got approvals from my bosses, and within 48 hours we were helicoptered into the canyon in the national park. This site is guarded, it is kept incredibly secret because of the pathogens that we believe have been brought into the site by bushwalkers over the years and are threatening the trees. Phytophthora cinnamomi is the main pathogen, a water mold, and the trees are incredibly susceptible to it because of their ancient genetics. And we went in there. We had essentially a day to construct this irrigation system to try to put enough water into the leaf litter to reduce the intensity of the fires when they eventually came through. And all the while we had to maintain these incredible hygiene protocols. We had to spray every single piece of equipment ourselves. Anything that touched the ground had to be sprayed down with a methylated spirits solution, like an alcohol solution. And we managed to put this sprinkler system up, and we hope it made a difference. There was a point in time when we were down there where we thought we might be the last people on earth to ever see those trees. And the ash sort of started falling from the sky, the canyon filled with smoke, and they had helicopters on standby to try and get us out. And eventually we got out, and the fires moved through a few days later, and some incredibly heroic national parks firefighters who do remote aerial firefighting were winched into the site immediately after the fire. They used parts of our sprinkler system to put out some of the blazes that were still burning on the trees. The truly heroic sort of stuff just to save these trees. And that story ended up being released a month or so, or a few weeks later, right when the whole of the east coast of Australia was on fire. And at the time it was kept really secret. Everybody worried, are people going to say, why are they saving a bunch of trees when houses are burning and all that happened? But when the story came out, it was just this incredible good news story that I think people needed right very, very dark time. And it was wonderful. To this day, you probably hear it's a bit emotional. It's this thing to felt like I got to play this tiny little part in something that is just it's a multi-generation project to try and save these trees, to try and establish these wild sites of them. Um, and I get to work with these people that are just incredible. Like, I'm just a horticulturist and an arborist, really. I'm great at growing the things and looking after things and doing that, but these people, they know these things on the deeply, almost molecular level. They write PhDs about it. They carry out all sorts of experiments. And suddenly I was there. I'd read the book, I'd seen the movie, and then next thing I'm there with them. Um, and that's the sort of, sorry, I went on a big long rant about a story, but I'm sort of passionate about it. It's hard not to be involved when you get to be so involved with such a wonderful species. It's the gateway drug to plant conservation in Australia.
No, it's fantastic. It's such a good, like, that was such a good story. I know you said you were off on a tangent or a ramble. Not at all. I was on an emotional roller coaster with you. I know you said it makes you emotional. I'm lost for words. I think it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, such a fantastic and important and brilliant story that, yeah. And I feel like, yeah, if the listeners at home, if you've not been hit emotionally by this, what's going on? Because that was it's such a good, emotional, strong story. And I think if you're not writing this down, get writing, because you've got the sequel to the original book right there, because that's such a fantastic story of kind of triumph and protection of nature, and I think so important. And yeah, I loved it. It's one of my favorite stories I think I've ever heard on the podcast. It's just fantastic. And yeah, I think it makes it, once you've found something, and the thought of losing it again must be so tricky. I think, like, I can't imagine. I can't even begin to imagine that. I get, like, it would just be so dreadful. And so the lengths that you've gone to try and protect it are fantastic, and it's such a good story. And yeah, when you think about it even wider and you think beyond the trees, it's easy to see why people fell in love, because these trees don't just represent the trees themselves, they represent all of the wildlife of Australia, because those trees will have provided refuge for so many other plant and animal species, and they just are kind of this, yeah, hope, this image of hope and life. And so to protect them, it's, yeah, just such a good story. It's not often someone gets me speechless or
Yeah.
whatever it is on the podcast, but that is such a good story. Such a good story.
Like, it's funny. I always try to look for the silver linings in these things, and I think all of us, after the pandemic and everything, everyone's really trying to do that. And there are some great silver linings. I mean, that story came out. It was so big that it was Leonardo DiCaprio posted it on his social media pages, and I tease Barron about him being, Leonardo DiCaprio's his biggest fan, but it led to a bit of a resurgence. I mean, our scientists, like all over the world, science funding is always driven by all sorts of other influences, and it's so hard for any scientist to get the funding they need to study these things. And our organisation, like I mentioned, the Australian Institute of Botanical Science and our Royal Botanic Gardens Domain Trust, they've been working at this stuff on the Wollemi pines for years. But again, the stories that came out of this, our politicians were enraptured by it. It was wonderful. They felt it was something they needed to get behind. Our state government has declared the Wollemi pine an asset of intergenerational significance. It's led to a resurgence in the research work that's going into it. Our scientists have been reinvigorated. There's a lot of simple science going on to do with, well, very complex, actually, I shouldn't be reductive, to do with pollination experiments using our living collection. We're looking at building seed banks, securing the genetic diversity of sort of all the wild trees in our living collections. And the public, are coming and wanting to buy Wollemi pines again. And it's just this wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's great to see. And I think, yeah, it's great to see, because it's like, I feel like a lot of the time plants get the short end of the kind of short end of the stick, no pun intended. They get they get less focused than kind of animals. They're inherently harder to teach about and fall in love with and kind of educate people about, because they have this disadvantage in that they're not classically cute. They don't have the big fluffy fur, and they don't have the big floppy ears or the big round eyes. They kind of are harder to sometimes sell. So I think, yeah, this silver lining that there has been this resurgence, even though it's so hard and it came in a really tricky circumstance, I think is so important. And I think it's really encouraging that there are stories out there about plants that even though they're not typically charismatic, they are it's special, and they have these amazing stories, and they mean so much. And yeah, it's so important to kind of highlight them. I really like it. I'm just about getting myself back together from the story. That's there. But while I do, I think what I want to know about is, obviously we've had this resurgence now all about the Wollemi Pine. It's beloved by people. They've fallen back in love with it again, and it's got this news coverage and all that sort of stuff. What other species do you think, if you could maybe not shift the focus, but if you could shine another spotlight onto another underappreciated plant species that you work with, which one would you choose? What would you want to highlight and tell people about?
Look, I'd say it's probably not. I don't have a really strong personal attachment to it, but it's funny you ask. We have this other species that's like. I hate to use this. Someone would probably be angry at me for saying this. It's like the red-headed stepchild of the Wollemi pine. It's called the dwarf mountain pine, and it's called Ferrisfera fitzgeraldii, and it is another super rare small conifer, a bit more like a shrub. It used to be called Microstrobus fitzgeraldii. There's only about 600-ish of them in the wild. They're only found south in the spray zones of south-facing waterfalls in the Blue Mountains and right below the most heavily populated areas of the Blue Mountains. So from a place called Wentworth Falls, which is near where Charles Darwin walked there when he visited Australia, through sort of west of that to a famous place, Katoomba, near the Three Sisters. And our garden's also been involved in preserving that. And it's actually an amazing little plant for a cool climate bathroom in your spray zone of your shower. And I've killed quite a few of them by trying to do that. But they're not this amazingly big plant. You know, they've sort of got this pendulous grey foliage, almost like some of the prostrate junipers and things like that, but very light, very delicate foliage. And there's an incredible use for them in the landscape. They're actually a lot tougher than we give them credit for. They just need to be wet. They're great for a moist, shady spot in the garden. And yeah, we haven't established a translocation site for them yet, but it's something that we're sort of chipping away at. We've had to pause through the fires and the pandemics and everything on that. But yeah, again, it's this other quirky little plant. It's so local to us. It's from right nearby. You know, a lot of people go to these waterfalls near Katoomba and they wouldn't even know they're looking at it because it gets no publicity. It's only us that sing its song. And next to the Wollemi pine, you know, there's this poor little thing that we trundle out pots of it. We sell them at our visitor centre, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, that's great, but I want a Wollemi pine.
Yep. It's this possible impossible battle where you're kind of like, yeah, look over here, this one's cool too, look over here. Yeah, it's not an easy one to try and deal with. But yeah, it must be impossible for you living in that area as well, like people going out and discovering these things. It must be impossible for you to go anywhere and enjoy kind of a nice casual hike, because like you'll be looking at everything, you'll be kind of like wanting to stop every 5 minutes to examine and like see something, and like it would be exciting, but it would be impossible for you to go anywhere properly. And I guess with friends or family, like if you were trying to drag them around and they're like every 5 minutes, we need to keep walking, we can't stop and look at every tree, like it can't be a great experience every time for them either.
Yeah. I'm sure you're probably like me. You follow, I'm sure conservation people are the same. It's the plant memes. Yeah, pointing out plants. I think my partner, she actually is into food security and market gardening and plants and conservation land management. But as well, if I'm like, look at this little orchid here. Hey, look at this. Great. Can we just enjoy the walk?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I posted a photo the other day actually of the Titan arum, which we have at Edinburgh, has just bloomed. And for people who don't know, it's kind of one of the world's largest flowers. It's the world's largest, I think, unbranched inflorescence. It's a huge, smelly, amazing, beautiful, insane plant that's like, I posted a photo standing next to it, and it was taller than me almost. Like it's crazily huge. And yeah, everyone obviously started commenting and posting things and replying to me, being like, what is what is that you're posing next to? This strange alien look at what is that? What is that? And then obviously they should know that once they do that, that has opened Pandora's box, and they're gonna get all of these kind of responses back of like, oh, it's cool, it's this, that, and it does this, and it smells because of this, and it's big, and it does this, and it only blooms every this many years, or whatever it is. And so, but I think it's so important that even though they kind of might not necessarily have asked for that information, they get delivered it, and it's something we all need to be doing. It's like making people fall in love with these like charismatic mega flora, almost the equivalent of charismatic mega fauna. Like, these are our elephants, these are our whales, these are our kind of things, and hopefully one day we can get the dwarf mountain pine up to that same level of like, oh, it's cool, it's really, really interesting, it's the kind of new little cool plant on the block that everybody loves and everyone wants to see, alongside the Wollemi and the Titanarum and all these other big interesting things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, like the Titanarum, you need these flagship sort of species. People, you've got to get, like, it's easy preaching to the choir, right? But you've got to get people in. You've got to get them engaged with plants and thinking about conservation in those ways. On the Titanarum, just to digress, my colleague the other day said, if you're a plant, what plant could you be? And people were throwing out pretty funny things. And I straight away, I just thought I was being funny. I said, Titanarum because I'm tall, I stink, and 3/4 of the year I'm nothing. So,
yeah, and hopefully no one in the room went, "Yep, that seems about right." Yep, that's
pretty much right. Yeah,
slightly harsh, but yeah, I mean, it's a good one to be. It's of all the plants, it's the one most people know. So yeah, I feel like it's a backhanded compliment in a way. Interesting though, interesting. I don't want to start doing that for me because otherwise I feel like, yeah, it could get insulting. I'll maybe have a think about that one. Maybe ask some very kind people what they think, what plant I would be. But before we get too distracted by that, what I did want to ask is, talking about the garden, and it seems like where it's placed and everything that goes on in it, and all of these amazing species, it must be a hive of just biodiversity and interesting, bizarre kind of species and ecosystem interactions and kind of, yeah, all of these kind of beyond the plants and beyond the individual, the kind of interesting an interesting environment to kind of exist in and have animals and plants and everything thrive together. So I wondered, for our listeners who are maybe more interested in the kind of wider ecosystem or the animal interactions or whatever it is, what kind of stuff do you see and experience in the garden? What kind of, beyond this kind of the trees that are planted there by you, what kind of biodiversity do you see thriving in the area?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I mean, probably not so much in terms of really technical like mutualism or symbiosis or anything, but yeah, one of the there's a couple of amazing things about our garden is, like you said, where we're positioned. We've got an incredible array of bird life. Like when I was younger, I used to laugh at bird people and twitchers, and now I'm totally a bird person. But we during the pandemic, after the fires, the garden was closed on and off for several times over the last couple of years. And because so much of the habitat out in the wilderness was destroyed and incredibly damaged by the fires, our garden became a real oasis for the bird life. And we've always had incredible diverse bird life, but we have the eastern lyrebird, eastern superb lyrebird, which I'm not sure, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's this incredible bird. It's kind of a scaled down, less colourful peacock, yet it's heaps better than a peacock. It's one of the most incredible mimics in the bird kingdom. And there's, if you YouTube it and look it up, there's videos of them mimicking chainsaws, mimicking dogs, mimicking sirens, all these things. And in the last sort of year, especially during the lockdown, and I was privileged enough to sort of have the garden to myself a lot of days during the lockdown, during the pandemic, about at least 6 lyrebirds have come all the way up in the garden, right up into right near our visitor centre. They're incredibly used to people now. And last year, I think some scientists published a paper that suggested that, I think they said the lyrebird out of all animals alters its environment more than any other animal, purely based on volume of material that it affects, and more than beavers, more than everything, it moves an average male lyrebird, I think, moves tons of leaf litter a year, and they scratch through the soil. They've got this beautiful big arching tail feather, like sort of plumage in their tails, and they put that up to attract a female, and then they start dancing and going through their entire mimicry, and they're also doing this incredible thing for the O layer in under our tree collection. They're turning over all of this wonderful mulch for looking for grubs and insects. And we're I guess it's not necessarily scientific yet, but more and more we're thinking about how we manage our woodlands and our tree collections in this ecological way. That the trees aren't just in isolation, the plants aren't in isolation. These animals are doing things for them, even if the plants aren't native, even if these are the exotics in our collection. And the same goes for plants as a food source. So we're lucky enough to have the gang cockatoo, which is a endangered Australian native cockatoo that is endemic to the east coast of Australia and around where and the ranges around where the Blue Mountains Botanic Garden is. And because we have walnuts, we have all sorts of conifers. The parrots just love them. So we get these wonderful gang cockatoos, and they're this quirky little bird, grey foliage with sort of grey plumage, not foliage. They're a bird. Um, and this funny little tuft of a comb on top of their head, and people call them the creaky door. So their call sounds like a creaky door. They kind of do this funny like, and at certain times of year when the conifers are all coning and when the walnuts are out, they just come in, and our staff will be lucky enough to be working near, 5 or 6 of them just in the trees making a mess, filling their bellies full of high starch and protein. And it's wonderful when you think a lot of these things, their habitat is under threat, or they're vulnerable or threatened with extinction because of all these human um, threats, really. Yet our gardens, the plants we plant, can become a really vital food source for them, and we've really seen that in the last few years. And I think we're probably far more aware of it because of what happened in the fires and seeing all of that habitat loss. But yeah, it's wonderful when you sort of every year in Australia there's an organisation called BirdLife Oz, and they do a Bird of the Year vote. And I always vote for the gang. And we're lucky enough to see them, like, fairly regularly in our garden.
Mhm. That's really interesting to hear because, yeah, it's like whenever I think of botanic gardens that are placed in cities, like you think of them as like this hub of like biodiversity because they may have been just animals and plants and whatever it is, may have been displaced from normal environments because obviously there's more building and building and building and building and spreading outwards and upwards and all this stuff that displaces these animals. So you think of it in that way, but it's amazing to hear that even yes, where you would I know you would expect it more, but it's interesting to hear about the animals that in a more natural setting still thrive within a garden space and come into a garden space. It's really 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 interesting. And I think the lyrebird is such a good example. It's such a charismatically bizarre
Yeah.
animal, and anyone who hasn't heard the mimicking of the lyrebird, it like that was what rang because I recognized the name when you said it, and it was only when you said mimicking I was like yes, because it's amazing, slightly creepy, but amazing, and I
Yeah.
think everyone go and look up a clip of a lyrebird doing its song because it's fantastic and amazing and just great. And I think it's a good one to highlight as well because I think when a lot of people think of ecosystem engineers, they think
Mm.
of big mammals. They think of things like elephants that turn over so much landscape and kind of break down trees and leave all these footprints which turn into mud, which turn into kind of little micro habitats. They think of all this sort of stuff, but they don't necessarily think about the birds. So it's amazing to find this great example of an ecosystem engineer that is perhaps a bit a bit smaller, a bit stranger, a bit more underappreciated. I think plants in general, they're a bit like the trees. They are just underappreciated for what they are. They're beautiful, they're fantastic, they're amazing. They have so much amazing life in them, and they have so many interesting traits and things. And I think we need to fall in love with our birds a bit more. So I'm very very glad you used that example. It's fantastic, really really interesting, really really interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, the lyrebirds, they actually they live in the same habitat as where the Wollemi pine exists. And when we did some work in establishing one of the translocation sites. I'd never seen it before, but we were working up around some rocky sort of overhangs, and there was this big sort of nest up essentially in a little sandstone cave. And I asked one of the ecologists that was with us, I was like, what's that? And they're like, oh, that's a lyrebird nest. And this thing that's down on the forest floor raking away, I'd never even thought about where it nests, and that the fact that they're up in these canyons, and clearly the plants down there, including the Wollemi pine, have evolved with these birds. Birds are just dinosaurs, right?
Yeah, they're pretty much the same thing, right? Yeah, same thing, right? And it's one of those things, you look at them and you think you're not particularly scary. Look at you, you're just like a little whatever feather thing. You think, oh, but great grandfather of you was a big scary, but maybe not as quite as scary as the perhaps falsely designed velociraptors and things that we see on TV. But still, we got to give you some respect for some your history, your ancestry there, Mr. Birds, Mr. and Mrs. Birds, because you come from a scary lineage. And I guess, I mean, I'm about to ask a real downer of a question, but I think it's really an important one, because that was all interesting. We've fallen in love. We've gotten people to love these trees and these birds and nature and all sorts of stuff. But I have to ask, because we are a conservation podcast, we've talked a little bit about the threats to some of the species that we've been discussing, but could you tell us maybe a little bit more about them? We've hyped people up. We need to now bring them back down to earth. What are the kind of threats? Is it that you mentioned pathogens and fires? Are those the main threats to the species? What would you consider to be the big threats to the species that we've discussed today?
Yeah, look, I mean, sadly, really the biggest threat is people. We, as I think there was a time when, even as an organisation, we were a bit tentative to talk about this in a negative way, but we're facing an extinction crisis. I think everyone in the conservation field is very aware of that now. I think it's, in some ways, it is a positive thing that the general public and the laymen are really aware of it. We're watching the climate change before our very eyes, and the things that are coming with that: increased wildfire, increased drought. Those things are just they're the nails. If we're not going to do something about it, they're the nails in the coffin that are coming in on top of all of this stuff to do with fragmentation of habitat destruction, land clearing, all these other human-caused problems that are pretty consistently, you look at any threatened species, be it animal or plant, and you look at the scientific assessments of them, you look at the threats, generally most of those processes where our amazing scientists around the world, work so hard to identify the threats. And the commonality is that it's habitat destruction, it's changing climate, and then you throw on the pathogens. To me, more and more in horticulture and arboriculture, we think of, a lot of pathogens are out there. They're in the environment. Things like Phytophthora cinnamomi that threatens the Wollemi pine. It's almost ubiquitous in the landscape these days. Whether it was there pre-colonial times or not could be debated by some people, but the thing is, when the plants are culturally grown well, when their habitat is strong, when the ecosystem is strong, the plants have a better chance to survive. The animals have a better chance, more resistance, just like our immune systems as humans. And once with the threats faced by a changing climate, and all these other things, that once a pathogen gets into those environments, then the plants sometimes don't stand a chance. And that's the real tough bit to accept. I think it's scary. Some people get quite depressed about it. We all have our dark days when we're worried about it. But then you look at a lot of the solutions, the things our scientists are working so hard on around the world, and the answers are there, the solutions are there. Someone asked me in an interview after the fires about what I thought about all of this, and it sounds a bit big and a bit airy-fairy, but I can't help but always thinking that, some people would deny this and say it's a conspiracy, but America put a man on the moon in a decade when a president said, we're going to do this. And they threw science, all their money and science and technology at it. And we all kind of know that the world's facing this problem, climate change, species, extinction crisis. And yet we've got all the tools, everything we can do, the money, we could change it, and we could address a lot of it. and we could turn a lot of it around. And the wonderful conservation stories, saving the Wollemi pine, that's just one of so many that are going on around the world by incredible people in places like botanic gardens and zoos, and we can do more. And that's kind of like, that's the positive spin on all of that. The threats are there, but also the answers and solutions to those threats are also there. So
yeah, yeah, that was the perfect answer, because you spun it there at the end and made it hopeful and positive, and I think that's the really important thing, because the fight is never lost as long as we keep going and trying to protect what we love and what we believe in, and there's no, the battle's never lost. We can keep doing things, and I think, that was a really good spin. The perfect way to answer the question is to kind of, make it a positive one, because and I don't, especially now, I don't know if it was the same for you in Australia, but obviously with us here, with COVID and everything, people were forced outdoors again, and they kind of couldn't go inside for restaurants, they couldn't go inside for family gatherings, they couldn't go inside to do all the things they normally do. We were all outside all of the time, and we started to fall back in love with nature again, and we started to fall in love with the plants, the trees, the weird mushroom things that grow, the kind of birds that sing in the trees. We fell in love with everything that was part of nature again, and I hope that will continue here. I don't know if it, and kind of inspire people to keep wanting to protect this thing that they fell back in love with. And I wonder, was it the same for you there? Did you kind of have this, everyone being forced back outside, so we're to kind of falling back in love with nature? Was that a thing for you as well? Because I'd be really interested to know like what your experience was with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's wonderful to see people just gardening, and you know, I'll put my hand up. I've been guilty of being that sort of horticulture snob, where I'm like, you know, you can't plant that, you know, but more and more these days, I'm like, if someone's going to Bunnings or like B&Q over there, and buying some pansies or buying some, you know, commoner's muck grass and just having a go at gardening, or if they're going to their botanic gardens and trying to buy Wollemi pine or whatever it is, and just having a go, we've seen a huge increase in that. You know, the indoor plant trend at the moment of people trying to, you know, spend ridiculous amounts on a variegated monstera. It's fun. It's easy to laugh at that, but then it's also wonderful when you think like I've used the phrase before, but the gateway drug. You know, people get into that, and then you never know, they'll go, I really enjoy growing plants. And then, like I said, I wasn't a bird person years ago. Now I'm a bird person. Well, like it all starts. The more you engage, the more you look into the natural world, beyond just David Attenborough movies and stuff, and you actually start engaging with it in the flesh, like real time. That's the way through.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I can speak from personal experience, because like, even though like when I was younger, like we grew tomatoes and stuff in our garden, and there was always plants around us and whatever it was. But like, ever since I started working at the Botanics, there has been an exponential increase in the number of plants in my life. And I think once you buy one, then you start, like, it's like the gateway, and then you kind of, like it's this kind of like, you kind of buy one, and then you're like, oh, like I went into a local garden centre here and like bought an aloe vera that was looking a bit sad around Christmas time. And ever since then, so there was an aloe vera that I've nursed back to health. It's huge, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. And then I've gotten a cactus, and then another cactus, and then another cactus, and then I was like, oh, I'll grow wildflowers and vegetables and potatoes and this, that. And like, sooner or later, you start looking around and you go, I've suddenly become a plant person, and I now have 100 plants all around me, and it's everything from moss balls to aloe vera to massive palms and all sorts. Like, you just all of a sudden, like, all of these things start exploding into your life, and it just makes your life better. The more plants you have, the better your life will be. I can see, get plants, learn about plants, get one or two. But be prepared that those one or two will be a gateway into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more. Really, but the best decision and the best things you can ever commit to and overcommit to, I would say, is the purchase and the care of plants. I don't know. I guess now we've kind of we've talked about it throughout, and I guess a good piece of advice is already kind of like committing to getting plants, but I wondered, at this point, I always like to ask if you have any advice for people who want to support maybe the conservation of plants or the protection of plants, or fall in love with kind of any of maybe specific species like the Wollemi or the Dwarf Mountain Pine or whatever it is, do you have advice for people who, during the course of our conversation, have fallen in love with these stories and want to do more? What would your advice be?
Yeah, look, I guess there's probably a couple of barrels to that. Like, for me, the most important thing is just encouraging people to engage. Like, just engage with it in whatever way you can. We've sort of just touched on that. But a lot of people, I think, are worried. They it seems unreachable because they're worried about killing plants if they grow them, or they're worried about not having time to learn or understand things that might be a bit abstract to them. But yet, there are so many ways to engage, whether that is your own little plant collection at home, but or volunteering at a local land care group. There are wonderful, grassroots movements, pardon the pun, of like restoring like local ecologies around the place. Like Australia has land care. There's movements everywhere where you can go down somewhere, you can get in touch. Social media, it's the wonderful side of social media, right? You can find these things, you can go out, you can learn off an expert. There'll be people there that have so much knowledge to give. They'll share things, they'll share plants, they'll give you anything, and you can pull some weeds out, you can restore and some habitat for some of the, and it might be that you prefer animals, but without the plants, the animals don't have anything to eat, and you can really make a difference by doing that. And I just think there's so many ways to do it, and I don't think there's a wrong way. I think engaging outside of the artificial world of social media or that, or sort of performative activism, that's great too, but it's better just to get your hands in the dirt, get out there in the trees, and look and engage. And the more you learn, the more there is to learn, and the more wonderful and interesting the world becomes. And you're making a difference. So that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's exactly it. Because it's like, ever since I planted all these wildflowers and grown all these things, like I've seen so much more biodiversity of every kind, like so many more birds in the garden, so many bugs and bees and insects and little creepy crawlies of all different shapes and sizes and colors and everything. Like, and so yeah, you kind of, without even meaning it, you're kind of helping promote a more biodiverse little space of land around your house. And so yeah, I think a fantastic piece of advice, because even if you're an animal person, say, like, doing this encourages more biodiversity. It, like, just, yeah, great advice, great advice. And what it has kind of got me thinking about is, when you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, like, before I started working at the Botanic Garden that I work at now, I didn't realize just how many ways there were to be involved with plants. And there's a way to be involved with plants for everyone. So, like, we at Edinburgh, I don't know, probably similar things for you guys, but we run education courses not just in kind of conservation and that sort of stuff, but also in botanical art and herbology, and all sorts of different age groups, and online and in person, lots of different diverse ways of learning. And yet there's just so many ways to engage and learn and grow to love plants that, yeah, I think it's fantastic. There's such there's something out there that is in the plant genre for anyone or everyone, and it's, yeah, just so fantastic. Yeah, all you really need to do is just get started, I suppose. Yeah, just get started and get out there. It's great. It's really great.
And don't forget to hug a tree. Hugging trees is awesome. Hug it, put your ear to it. I used to be a bit sciencey and sort of didn't want to personify plants and give them that sort of, oh no, you can't do that, but it's the stories, it's the humanity, it's the thing that connects us all. And whether it's that books like The Hidden Life of Trees and things, where that's amazing how much reach that's had and got people thinking about ecology. And sure, you can say the trees are talking, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but the thing is that people are suddenly thinking about something bigger than just one tree in a forest. They're thinking about the whole forest and how it's working. It's great.
No, I'm exactly the same, because it's so hard not to have favorites, because there is so much out there, and it's so easy to fall in love with these kind of, like, fantastic, beautiful, amazing, wonderful things, and you start to personify them and you start to fall in love more with them, and kind of, yeah, it's really hard not to, especially with kind of, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot with teaching a summer school about these kind of folklore myths and legends and stuff that goes on around plants. And especially here in Europe, we've got things like the Greek myths are very accessible to us through school and all sorts of things. I don't know if they're similarly taught to you guys as well, but here in, like, they are all kind of around and about in our consciousness, and things like the stories of Narcissus and how he became a plant, how he became the daffodil, and things like the story of Hades and Persephone and how the seasons came to be, and like all of these things that have to do with plants, they just, yeah, they make you fall in love. And so yeah, I could see it's very, very hard not to have favorites. So yeah, I I fully agree. But I think we are going down another tangent, and we have already spoken for like an hour. So I think we need to start wrapping up, because otherwise, I mean, I could talk to you all day about this, and I think it would be great to. Because I've finally woken up. For listeners, for context, we started recording this first thing in the morning because the time difference between Australia and Scotland is quite significant. So we recorded this, and when we started, I was slightly zoned out of reality. I think I recovered well, but now I'm tuned properly in, and I'm ready to keep going. Let's go for another hour. Actually, yeah, scrap it. I hope cancel every plan you've got in your diary for tonight. I'll cancel my day plans. We'll go for another hour. No. In all seriousness, there's one more question that I like to ask, which is just very simple one. If people want to keep up to date with anything you're doing, or like want to learn more about any of the topics that we've discussed today, or any of the gardens work, or anything that we've chatted about, what do you think? What should they go and look at? What should they go and learn about? What would you recommend that they go and do?
Yeah. Look, if you Google the Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens, Sydney or Australia, the Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney, that'll take you to links to our web pages. Their sites are kind of interlinked. There's some blogs. There's probably a weird, embarrassing profile about me. There's some great stuff there. And then there's, if you Google Wollemi Pine bushfires, you'll find some wonderful news articles about the stories that I spoke about there, and the amazing efforts by all sorts of people to save those trees. And then, yeah, for those voracious readers, I think I mentioned it, the Wollemi Pine by James Woodford. It's just a wonderful book. It's actually, really does make plant conservation sound incredible.
That's, yeah, fantastic. And I'll put links to all of that in the description for this episode. So any listeners who want to like learn about anything that you've mentioned or whatever it is throughout the episode, I'll chuck loads of links down there. I'll try and post some like photos, or I'll put links to articles or whatever it is about the some of the plants that we've discussed down there as well, because I think sometimes, don't know if it's just me, I sometimes have a hard time picturing plants when people try and describe them to me. I like to have a visual, so I'll put links to all that sort of stuff down there. And yeah, so hopefully we can we can inspire some more love of plants through the bazaar using those links down there as well. And I'm sure it'll be easy to fall in love with them, because they're just so fantastic.
We'll win them over eventually. Yeah,
exactly. Because my problem is always when I pick popular plants, when I pick plants to back, I already pick ones that are popular. Like, I'll always pick things like, oh, I love the jade vine, and then people will be like, oh yeah, everyone has a jade vine, we all know what that is. So now I have one that's like a plant I can back that is bizarre and interesting and different to everything else, and I'm excited by that. It's just fantastic. It's amazing. So yes, the justice for the Dwarf Mountain Pine. And I'm teaching a summer school actually this summer, so I think I'll try and push the Wollemi story and everything as much as I possibly can to the kids, and see hopefully some of them will fall in love with it as well, just as this kind of propaganda for them. Now I guess now is the time to wrap up, and it's a shame, because I feel like there's so much more we can discuss. Maybe we can have another episode very, very soon, but to wrap up, all I've got to say is, of course, thank you to the listeners for listening. As I said, I've popped all the links down there if you're interested in anything we've been talking about. Also, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Please give us a follow so you don't miss out on any future episodes. You can also leave a nice review for us there as well. So if you want to add anything nice, you can write something. You can just give us a star rating. If there's anything you want to do, you can do that. We would very much appreciate it. You can also check us out on social media. We are at Pangolin Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as TikTok and LinkedIn and all over the place. Just look up Pangolin the Conservation Podcast or at Pangolin Podcast. You'll find us on there as well. And of course, course, last but not least, thank you so much, Ian, for joining me today. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. It's just been great. Your stories have been fantastic. You've made me laugh. You made me cry with the Wollemi story. It's just been a great time. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks heaps for having me. And yeah, when now the world is opening back up, you'll have to get down to Australia and make sure you drop us a line, and we'll take you out and show you a whole bunch of cool stuff.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Because yes, these podcast episodes are really setting up a good trip for me, because I've already spoken to Deborah Tabart from the Australian Koala Foundation, and I'm gonna cut so I will be in Australia eventually to bother her, and when I'm down, I will include you in my tour of Australia as well, because it would be absolutely fantastic to speak to you and see the garden for myself, because it's looking at it online and through pictures and everything, it looks absolutely fantastic. So I will turn up. I will one day. Whether you meant that or not, I will turn up. Now, but again, before we go off on another tangent, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And until next time, everybody, goodbye.